There is a moment, and every super empath who has lived through this knows exactly the moment I am talking about, where something shifts. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. There is no screaming, no ultimatum, no dramatic confrontation. It is quieter than that. It is the moment where you look at the person sitting across from you, someone you gave everything to, someone you saw completely, someone you believed in when they could not believe in themselves, and you simply stop. Not from exhaustion, though. You are exhausted, not from anger, though you have every right to be angry. You stop because something inside you, something ancient and unshakable, finally tells you the truth. And the truth is this: you were never the problem. What happens after that moment is what this is about, because most people focus on what happens to the super empath after the betrayal, the grief, the confusion, the slow and painful process of rebuilding. And yes, that journey is real. But there is another story, one that almost never gets told in full, and it is a story of what happens to the narcissist, not the version they perform for new supply, not the curated surface level moving on that they broadcast to the world. The real story, what happens inside the architecture of a person who just made the single most catastrophic mistake of their life and is only beginning to understand the weight of what they have destroyed. That story does not begin with punishment. It does not begin with suffering in the way we might imagine it. It begins with something far more insidious. It begins with the narcissist believing they have won. This is the first thing you need to understand, because it reframes everything that follows. When a narcissist betrays a super empath, their immediate internal experience is not regret. It is relief. It is the intoxicating, familiar rush of control regained. For a personality structure built entirely around the avoidance of vulnerability, the moment they push someone away, especially someone who is getting dangerously close to the truth of who they really are, feels like escape, like the pressure valve finally releasing. They sabotaged the relationship. They devalued the person who saw them most clearly. And in the immediate aftermath, there is a part of them that feels like they have outrun something. But here is the contrast that defines everything. What feels like escape is actually the beginning of a prison sentence, because the narcissist does not yet know what they have lost. They know they have lost a person. They do not yet understand that they have lost a function, a psychological function so fundamental to their ability to survive themselves that, without it, their entire internal world will begin to collapse in ways they have no framework to even name. The super empath, you see, was never just a partner. Not to the narcissist. While you experienced the relationship as love, complicated, exhausting, painful love, but love nonetheless, the narcissist experienced it as something else entirely, something they cannot admit, even to themselves. You were the only mirror that ever showed them something real, not the gilded reflection that admirers provide, not the fearful compliance they extract from people they dominate. You showed them something that no amount of charm or manipulation or image management could manufacture. You showed them that beneath the fortress, beneath the performance, beneath the grandiosity and the rage and the carefully constructed mask, there was a person, fractured, terrified, and real. And you stayed anyway. Do you understand how significant that is to someone who has organized their entire existence around the certainty that if anyone ever truly saw them, they would be abandoned? You saw, and you stayed. In the psychological economy of the narcissist, that is not just meaningful. It is the only thing that ever came close to feeling like safety. Which is why what they did to you was not just a betrayal of you. It was a betrayal of the only lifeline they had ever been thrown. Now contrast this with every other relationship in the narcissist's life, with the casual admirers, the people dazzled by the performance, the supply sources who worship the mask. When those relationships end, the narcissist experiences something unpleasant but manageable. A dip in validation, a wound to the ego, but nothing irreparable, because those people never had access to anything real. They were interacting with a construct, and losing them simply means finding a new audience for that same construct. The narcissist's defenses remain intact. The fortress has not been breached. They simply redeploy. But the super empath is not an audience member. The super empath is the one person who ever got inside the fortress. Not because you forced your way in, not because you were naive or manipulated, but because you have a quality that is genuinely rare, a depth of perception and compassion that allowed you to hold space for both the person the narcissist performed and the person they were hiding. You saw the wound beneath the weapon. You understood the fear beneath the rage. You held the paradox of who they were and who they could become, and you did it with a steadiness that no one in their life had ever offered them before. That is the specific quality they have now destroyed access to. Not warmth in general, not kindness in general, this precise, irreplaceable combination. And the moment they realize it cannot be found in the next person or the one after that is the moment the real consequences begin. But before we get to those consequences, and they are severe and they are permanent and they will touch every dimension of who the narcissist is, we need to understand one more thing about the super empath's power, because it was never just the seeing. It was what the seeing produced in the narcissist that made it so dangerous and so irreplaceable and so impossible to survive losing. There is a concept in psychology called a corrective emotional experience. The idea is simple but profound. Sometimes a person who has been deeply wounded in a relationship can begin to heal when they encounter a relationship that responds to them differently than the wound expects. Not a relationship that ignores the wound, not one that pretends the damage was never done, but one that sees the damage clearly and refuses to confirm the wound's central lie. For most narcissists, the central lie is this: I am fundamentally unlovable. And everything, the grandiosity, the control, the manipulation, the cruelty, is armor built to ensure that a lie is never tested. Because if it is tested and confirmed, the narcissist believes they will not survive it. The super empath, without necessarily intending to, without signing up for this role, becomes the closest thing to a corrective emotional experience the narcissist has ever encountered. Not because you fix them, not because you heal them, but because in your presence, for perhaps the first time in their life, the wound's central lie starts to feel less certain. You see them, truly see them, and you do not leave. You witness their worst moments, and you do not confirm their deepest fear. You offer something the wound has never encountered: sustained, clear-eyed, voluntary love. And here is the devastating paradox at the heart of everything that follows. That experience, that brush with the corrective, that flicker of something that could have been genuine healing does not make the narcissist more capable of receiving love. It makes them more terrified of it. Because now they know what real perception feels like. Now they know the difference between being admired for the mask and being known behind it. And being known is not a comfort to someone whose survival strategy is built on remaining unknown. Being known is the threat above all threats. It is the thing the entire fortress was constructed to prevent. So what do they do with someone who has already gotten inside? They destroy them, not out of hatred. This is the part that is most important to understand, because it is the part that most people in your position have spent years trying to make sense of. The narcissist does not betray the super empath because they hate them. They betray them because they cannot tolerate how much they need them, because the intimacy has become unbearable, because the closeness that felt like oxygen has started to feel like exposure. And the narcissist's pathology does not distinguish between the two. Vulnerability and danger feel identical to them. And so they do what they have always done when something threatens to reveal the truth of who they are. They burn it down before it can burn them. But here is where the narcissist's calculus fails completely. Here is where the strategy that has worked 1,000 times before simply does not work. With every previous relationship, burning it down was a reset, a return to the known, a controlled demolition that left the narcissist's core structure intact. They could rebuild the performance, find new supply, reconstruct the mask. The damage was always external and the fortress always remained, but you were already inside the fortress. The super empath does not exist on the outside of the narcissist's walls. You existed within them, which means when the narcissist burns it down, they are not burning down a bridge. They are setting fire to something that was inside the walls, and fire does not discriminate. The destruction they level at you, the devaluation, the cruelty, the betrayal, does not leave them standing in the ash with their defenses intact. It leaves them standing in the ash with the full awareness that the one person who could see them has now chosen to leave based on exactly what they saw, not in confusion, not in anger, in clarity. And that clarity is a wound the narcissist will carry for the rest of their life. Now watch what happens next, because this is where the consequences move from abstract to visceral. In the days and weeks following the betrayal, in that initial period when the narcissist is still telling themselves they are fine, they are free, they made the right choice, something begins to happen beneath the performance of okayness, something quiet and corrosive. They reach for the emotional regulation that used to be there, and they find nothing. They go looking for the internal stability that they never noticed was external, that it was yours, that you were the one providing it, and they discover an absence so profound it does not feel like missing a person. It feels like missing a limb, because that is precisely what it is. You were not just a partner to them, you were a psychological prosthetic for functions they never developed in themselves. The capacity to self-soothe, the ability to sit with shame without being consumed by it, the skill of processing emotion rather than projecting it, the experience of feeling real and coherent and whole. They did not build those capacities. They borrowed yours, and every single day you were present. They leaned on a structural support they were utterly unaware of, the way you only notice the wall when it is gone and the roof begins to fall. This is not a metaphor. Then is a clinical description of what happens to a psyche that has never developed internal regulation when its external regulator disappears. The narcissist's inner world was always chaotic, always oscillating between grandiosity and collapse, between the terror of being nothing and the performance of being everything. You made that survivable. Your steadiness, your depth, your extraordinary capacity to hold space without being destroyed by it, that was the counterweight to their chaos. Now the counterweight is gone, and the chaos has nowhere to go but in. Let us talk about what the narcissist does next, because this is the part that looks from the outside like they are fine. This is the part that can make you question everything you know about what happened. This is the part where they post the photos, find the new person, perform the comeback, and a small, exhausted part of you wonders if you were wrong about all of it, if you overestimated your significance, if they ever felt anything at all. You are not wrong, and here is how I know. The speed with which a narcissist moves on after losing a super empath is not evidence of indifference. It is evidence of panic. What looks like confidence is containment. What looks like moving forward is running from the silence that waits for them the moment the performance stops. The new relationship, the new supply, the sudden burst of social activity, and carefully curated visibility. None of it is recovery. All of it is noise. Deliberate, desperate noise designed to drown out the one sound the narcissist cannot bear to hear, the sound of their own interior. Because here is what lives in that silence now. Here is what is waiting for them every time the distraction fades, every time the new supply fails to land with the same weight, every time they catch themselves in a moment of stillness they did not choose, a question, simple, brutal, and unanswerable. If the one person who saw everything chose to leave, what exactly did they see? This is the question that does not go away. This is the question that will follow the narcissist through every subsequent relationship, every new beginning, every carefully staged chapter of their life. Not because they will ask it consciously. The narcissist's defenses are far too sophisticated for that kind of direct self-confrontation, but it will live underneath everything. A frequency they cannot tune out, a splinter they cannot locate or remove, and the new supply cannot touch it. This is the cruelty of the narcissist situation, a cruelty entirely of their own making, that the very thing they are using to escape the pain is structurally incapable of addressing it. A new admirer can worship the performance. They can validate the mask. They can provide the surface level supply that keeps the engine running, but they cannot answer the question. They cannot reach the wound. They do not have the perception, the depth, or the hard-won knowledge of who the narcissist actually is beneath the construct. And so their adoration, however genuine, lands like a compliment paid to a costume. The narcissist knows, on whatever level they are capable of knowing anything real, that this new person is applauding something that is not there. Contrast that with what you offered. Contrast that with the specific weight of being loved by someone who saw through the costume entirely and loved the person wearing it anyway. That is not a feeling that can be replicated by someone who has never seen the person underneath. It is categorically different, and the narcissist feels that difference every single day, even when they cannot name it, even when they would die before admitting it. This is the architecture of their suffering. Not dramatic, not the operatic collapse we might expect or even feel we deserve to witness. It is quieter than that. It is the low, persistent ache of someone reaching for something that used to be there and finding only air, repeated daily, compounded over time, growing heavier with every new relationship that proves again that what they had cannot be found elsewhere. But there is another layer to this, one that cuts deeper than the loss of regulation, deeper than the unanswerable question, deeper even than the absence of real connection. And it lives in the specific way that you left, because you did not leave in chaos. You did not leave in hysteria or bitterness or the kind of dramatic collapse that would allow the narcissist to rewrite the story. You left the way a super empath leaves when they have finally done the work with clarity, with self-possession, with the quiet and terrible dignity of someone who has chosen themselves without needing to destroy anyone else in the process. He left clean, and a clean departure from a super empath is the single most destabilizing thing a narcissist can experience. Here is why. The narcissist's entire narrative apparatus depends on being able to reframe every ending in their favor. When relationships end badly, with screaming, with recriminations, with the other person visibly falling apart, the narcissist can construct a story. They were unstable. They could not handle me. They did not understand what they had. The narcissist gets to be the one who outgrew the relationship, the one who was too much for a person who was ultimately not enough. The ending becomes evidence of the narcissist's superiority, and their defenses remain intact. But you did not give them that story. Your departure contained no raw material for their reframing. You were not unstable. You were not falling apart. You were not confused about what happened or why. You understood completely. You chose yourself completely, and you walked away with the composure of someone who has processed their grief rather than performed it. And that composure, that devastating, quiet composure, communicates something the narcissist cannot argue with. It says, I saw you clearly. I loved you anyway. I gave you every opportunity. And in the end, what you showed me was not enough to justify what it was costing me. That is not a rejection born of misunderstanding. That is a verdict born of complete information. And unlike every other ending, the narcissist has survived by rewriting the script. This one cannot be rewritten because the author, you already told the definitive version, and you told it without anger, without cruelty, without the kind of emotional volatility that leaves room for doubt. You simply told the truth. And the truth delivered without malice by the one person the narcissist could never fool is the one thing they have no defense against. And now we arrive at the part of this story that nobody tells. The part that exists not in the weeks after the betrayal, not in the months of new supply and performed recovery, but in the long, unforgiving stretch of time that follows all of it. The part where the noise finally runs out, where the distractions stop working at the level they used to, where the narcissist finds themselves, perhaps years later, in a quiet moment they did not plan for, and the full weight of what they destroyed arrives without warning and without mercy. This is not a breakdown. The narcissist is too defended for a clean breakdown. It is something more corrosive than that. It is the slow, creeping recognition that they are living a smaller life than the one they were offered. That every relationship since you has been a diminished version of something they once held and could not keep at the ceiling of what they are capable of experiencing. In terms of genuine connection, real intimacy, being truly known, was reached with you. And they chose again and again to destroy it rather than grow into it. Here is the contrast that defines the narcissist's long-term reality. While they remain fundamentally static, running the same patterns with new people, defending the same wounds with the same mechanisms, performing the same version of themselves on an endless rotating stage, you have been becoming. This is not poetic. This is not wishful thinking. This is the observable, documentable difference between what happens to a person who does the work of genuine healing and what happens to a person who refuses it. The super empath, freed from the impossible labor of loving someone who could not receive love, does something extraordinary with that reclaimed energy. They turn it inward. All that perception, all that depth, all that extraordinary capacity for holding complexity, it stops being poured into a void and starts being directed toward their own growth. And the transformation that follows is not subtle. It is the kind of flourishing that happens when a plant that has been growing towards someone else's light finally turns toward its own. Your creativity returns, your clarity sharpens, the relationships you build carry a different quality, reciprocal, nourishing, real. The career moves you were too drained to pursue become possible. The version of yourself you caught glimpses of in the rare moments when you were not managing someone else's chaos begins to emerge fully. You become more wholly yourself than you have ever been, and you do it not despite the pain of what you survived, but in some profound way because of it, because you used it, because you refused to let it be only loss. The narcissist watches this, not always directly, not always consciously, but through the PEB, peripheral channels that always remain mutual connections, social media, the unavoidable osmosis of a shared world. And what they witness is the living proof of the theorem they most need to disprove that you were the asset in that equation, that the relationship was not two people failing together, but one person being held back by another, that your flourishing is not incidental to their absence. It is inseparable from it. This is unbearable for the narcissist to metabolize for a reason that goes beyond wounded ego. It confronts them with a possibility they have no framework for processing. That transformation is real, that people genuinely change, genuinely heal, genuinely become more than they were. Because if that is true, and your life is standing evidence that it is, then the narcissist must face the corollary, that they have not changed. That despite the new relationships and the new stages and the relentless forward motion, they are essentially the same person they were the day you left, defending the same wound, avoiding the same truth, running the same program with a different cast, and they know it. This is the most important thing to understand about the narcissist's inner life at this stage. Beneath the performance of evolution, beneath the carefully maintained image of someone who has grown and moved on and arrived somewhere better, There is a part of them that knows with absolute certainty that they are standing still, that the mileage on the odometer is not the same as the distance traveled. That motion is not the same as growth. They know because they still feel the same things in the dark that they always felt. The same emptiness, the same fragmentation, the same exhausting requirement to perform existence rather than simply live it. You are no longer performing. That is the difference they cannot close. But perhaps the deepest consequence, the one that operates at the very foundation of who the narcissist is and what they needed from you, is this. You did not just love them, you believed in them. Not in the naive, uninformed way of someone who could not see clearly. You believed in them with full information. You saw the pathology, and you saw the potential, and you held both simultaneously, and you offered your belief as a kind of bridge between the two. A bridge they could have chosen to walk across at any point. A bridge that remained available through more pain than any person should be asked to endure, for longer than anyone could reasonably expect. And they chose every single time to burn it instead of cross it. What they lost when they lost you is not just love. It is the last witness to a version of themselves that was worth becoming. Because the belief you carried, specific, informed, undeceived, cannot be replicated by someone who has not walked the full length of their complexity. New people can offer hope. Therapists can offer frameworks, but no one will ever again offer what you offered, which was the belief of someone who knew everything and still saw something worth saving. That belief is gone now. Not because you stopped caring, but because they proved it wrong. Not through a single catastrophic moment, but through the accumulated weight of 1,000 smaller choices. Each one a step away from the bridge and toward the burning. They were offered the rarest thing a wounded person can be offered. Someone who saw their potential clearly and loved them faithfully while they found the courage to reach for it. They did not reach. And you are not required to wait any longer for someone who has chosen over and over the prison of who they are over the terrifying freedom of who they could become. You saw them completely. You loved them honestly. You left with your integrity intact. And now, chit, you will become everything they were too afraid to let themselves be. That is not their story anymore. That is yours. There is a moment, and if you have lived through it, you know exactly what I am talking about, where everything goes quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that makes your skin crawl, the kind where you realize somewhere deep in your gut that the person sitting across from you has just shifted into something you have never seen before, something colder, something calculated, something that no longer pretends to love you. You made a decision. Maybe you said it out loud. Maybe you just felt it for the first time without flinching, that this is over, that you are done. And in that exact moment, the moment they sensed it, the game changed. Not slowed down, not softened, changed into something far more dangerous than anything they put you through before. Most people think the hardest part of leaving a narcissist is the leaving itself, the packing of bags, the difficult conversations, the grief of walking away from someone you once believed was your person. But that is not the hardest part. The hardest part is what happens the second they know you mean it. Because that is when the mask does not just slip, it dissolves. And what is underneath has been waiting very patiently for this exact moment. This video is not about what narcissists do when they are comfortable. It is not about the love bombing, the silent treatment, or the gaslighting you have probably already heard about. This is about the final move. The one they save specifically for the moment you wake up, the dirtiest play in their entire psychological arsenal. And once you understand it, truly understand the mechanics of it, it loses all of its power over you completely, permanently. So stay with me, because what I am about to walk you through is going to explain things that have probably been living in your body as confusion, shame, and self-doubt for a very long time. To understand the final move, you first need to understand what a narcissist is actually running from. Beneath the confidence, beneath the control, beneath the charm and the rage and the manipulation, there is one thing driving every single behavior you have ever witnessed from them: terror. A specific, ancient, bone-deep terror of being nothing, of being empty, of being seen for what they truly are. A person who never developed a real self. Psychologists call this the false self. It is the constructed personality the narcissist built in childhood to survive a world that felt unsafe. Maybe they were raised by a parent who only gave them love when they performed. Maybe they were humiliated publicly and decided at 7 years old that they would never be vulnerable again. Whatever the origin, at some point they made it an unconscious trade. They buried their real self, fragile, uncertain, human, and replaced it with a version that could not be hurt. A version that needed to be admired, feared, or needed at all times, simply to feel real. Here is what that means for you. When you were in that relationship, you were not just a partner. You were a mirror. Every time you admired them, they felt real. Every time you feared them, they felt powerful. Every time you needed them, they felt significant. Your emotional reactions, your love, your anger, your tears, your laughter, were not just responses to them. They were the fuel that kept the entire false self running. You were the power source and you did not even know it. This is not a metaphor. This is literal psychology. The narcissist's nervous system learned to regulate itself through external validation rather than internal stability. They never developed the capacity to sit with themselves in silence and feel okay. So they built a system, a relationship, a dynamic, a set of behaviors designed to keep that validation flowing constantly. And at the center of that system was you. Now imagine what happens when the power source decides to switch off. Not a fight, not an argument they can win, not even a dramatic goodbye speech they can weaponize, just a quiet, certain internal withdrawal. The moment you stop needing their approval, the moment their criticism bounced off you instead of splitting you open, the moment you looked at them and felt nothing, not love, not hate, not fear, just clarity. That moment registers in their body like a 5-alarm fire. Everything they built their identity on is suddenly threatened. The mirror they relied on to see themselves is being packed up and taken away. And the response to that level of existential threat is not sadness. It is not grief. It is something far more primitive. It is survival panic dressed up as control. You might have felt it before you could name it. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Conversations that used to feel manipulative started feeling predatory. Their eyes followed you differently, not with desire, but with calculation, as if they were assessing the fastest route to a target. Small violations of boundaries you had recently set. Subtle provocations designed not to hurt you, but to get a reaction from you. Any reaction, because your reaction is proof that they still exist in your world. This is the beginning of the final move, not the move itself, but the setup, the reconnaissance. They are mapping your emotional terrain one last time, searching for the fastest way back inside. And what comes next, the actual weapon they deploy once they realize the quiet provocations are not working, is something so psychologically sophisticated, so perfectly designed to exploit the specific kind of person you are, that most people never see it coming, even after it has already worked on them. In the next part of this video, you are going to understand exactly what that weapon is, why it works on people like you specifically, and most importantly, why understanding it is the only protection you will ever need. Because here is the truth no one tells you. You do not need to become hard to survive this. You do not need to become cold or suspicious or emotionally shut down. You just need to understand what you are actually looking at. And once you do, you will never be the same person they thought they were dealing with. Let's talk about what happens in the hours, days, and sometimes weeks after they realize you are genuinely done. Because this phase has a very specific shape to it, and once you recognize the shape, you will stop being surprised by what they do next and start being prepared for it. The first thing that changes is the way they look at you, not dramatically, not in a way you could easily describe to a friend or a therapist. It is more like a quality of attention that shifts. Or before their gaze was possessive, the way someone looks at something they own, it becomes something harder to name. It becomes something harder to name. Appraising, tactical, as if they are no longer looking at you as a person, but as a problem they need to solve before it costs them something important. You might catch it over dinner, or in the car, or in that half second before they realize you are watching them watch you. And your gut registers it before your mind does. Something is wrong. Something is different. Something that was always hidden is now a little closer to the surface. What you are seeing is the collapse of the performance. For the entire relationship, maintaining the mask required effort. It required managing your perception of them, calibrating how much charm to deploy versus how much intimidation, knowing exactly when to apologize to keep you from leaving, and exactly when to punish you to keep you from leaving, feeling too secure. It was exhausting work, the constant management of a false image, but it was work they were willing to do as long as the supply was flowing, as long as you were still emotionally plugged into the dynamic. The moment you unplug, the motivation to maintain the performance disappears, not gradually, instantly. Because the performance was never for your benefit. It was for theirs. The charm, the occasional warmth, the moments that made you think this is the real them. None of that was an expression of who they are. It was a tool, a mechanism for securing your attachment. And tools get put down when they stop being useful. What you are left with, once the performance drops, is something that feels shockingly unfamiliar, even though you have been living beside it for months or years. A coldness that is not just emotional distance, a flatness behind the eyes that makes you feel like you're talking to someone who is calculating rather than feeling. Moments where their face does something, a flicker of contempt, a micro expression of satisfaction at your discomfort that passes so quickly you almost convince yourself you imagined it. You did not imagine it. What you are seeing is the part of them that was always there, running quietly behind the persona they showed you. The part that views other people not as human beings to connect with, but as resources to be managed. And now that the resource is withdrawing, the mask that covered that part is no longer being maintained. What you are seeing, possibly for the first time, is the thing underneath. This is what psychologists sometimes call the devaluation phase. But that clinical term does not fully capture how it actually feels. Because devaluation sounds like a gradual downgrade, a slow cooling of affection. What actually happens is more like a sudden rewrite. The entire narrative of your relationship starts getting edited in real time. Things they praised you for become things they mock. Your confidence, which they once said they loved, is suddenly arrogance. Your sensitivity, which they once said drew them to you, is suddenly weakness. Your independence, which they once said was attractive, is suddenly a character flaw that explains everything wrong between you. And here's the part that makes this so disorienting. They say these things with absolute conviction. There is no uncertainty in their voice, no sign that they remember the opposite being true 6 months ago. It is as if the earlier version of the story never existed, as if your entire history is being overwritten by a new version where you were always the problem, and they were always the one trying to hold things together despite you. This is not confusion on their part. It is not even conscious lying in the way most people think of lying. It is something more disturbing, a psychological defense mechanism called splitting, where the mind cannot hold two contradictory truths about the same person at the same time. You're either completely good or completely bad. There's no nuance, no middle ground, no complexity allowed. The moment you stop validating their false self, you get reassigned from the good category to the bad one. And every memory, every interaction, every piece of shared history gets retroactively reinterpreted through that new lens. This matters because of what it sets in motion next. Once you have been internally reclassified as the villain, the narcissist does something that looks on the surface like it is about you, but it is entirely about them. They begin to manage the narrative externally. They start talking, not to you, about you, to the people around you, the friends you share, the family members who know you both, the colleagues who see you both regularly, and they do it with a specific, very carefully constructed tone. Not rage, not accusations, concern. They approach these conversations with furrowed brows and lowered voices. They sigh heavily before they begin. They say things like, "I do not want to say anything negative, but I am genuinely worried." They frame themselves as reluctant witnesses to your unraveling, people who care about you deeply, but feel they have an obligation to share what they have been observing. They use words like erratic, unstable, concerning, not herself lately. They make people lean in, voices dropping to match theirs without ever having issued a single direct accusation. This is the smear campaign, and it is already in motion before you have even started telling your side of the story, before you have even realized there is a story to tell. The well has been poisoned. And now, when you reach out, when you try to process what you have been through, when you look for support in the people closest to you, you find something unexpected. A slight hesitation before they respond, a careful quality to the questions they ask, a sense that they are listening to you through a filter that was not there before. That filter has a name. And it was installed by the person you were trying to leave. You were prepared for the cold eyes. You were prepared for the rewritten history and the whisper campaign moving through your social circle like a slow poison. You had built something inside yourself. Not a wall exactly, but a kind of clarity. A quiet, firm knowing that what you were doing was right. That the distance you were creating was necessary. That the person you once loved was not who you thought they were. You held onto that knowing like a handrail in the dark, and then they cried. Not the performative frustration you had seen before, not the anger dressed up as hurt that they deployed when you set a boundary. This was diffus, rent. This was the kind of crying that seems to come from somewhere so deep and so unguarded that your entire nervous system responds to it before your mind has a chance to intervene. Shoulders shaking, voice breaking, eyes that looked for the first time maybe ever, genuinely lost. And every carefully constructed wall you built began to tremble. This is the moment that has pulled more people back into cycles of abuse than any other. Not the love bombing at the beginning, not the intermittent reinforcement in the middle. This moment right here, the collapse, the breakdown, the sudden devastating vulnerability, is the most sophisticated and most dangerous weapon in the entire arsenal, because it does not work by overpowering you. It works by recruiting your own best qualities against you. Your empathy, your compassion, your deep, genuine belief that people can change. To understand why this works so completely, you need to understand something about the kind of person who ends up in these relationships in the first place. People who are targeted by narcissists are not weak. That is one of the most damaging myths about this experience, and it needs to be said clearly. The people who get drawn deepest into these dynamics are almost always people with an exceptional capacity for empathy, people who lead with generosity and assume the best about others, people who believe that love is something you work for and fight for and refuse to abandon when things get difficult. These are not flaws. In any other context, they are extraordinary qualities. But in this context, they are the exact vulnerabilities being targeted. The narcissist, whether consciously or through years of refined instinct, has spent the entire relationship mapping your emotional architecture. They know what makes you feel needed. They know what makes you feel guilty. They know the specific combination of words and behaviors that activates the part of you that believes broken people deserve to be stayed for. And when every other tactic has failed, when the cold eyes did not break you, when the rewritten history did not make you doubt yourself enough, when the smear campaign did not isolate you completely, they reach for this. The one thing they know you cannot easily walk away from. Someone who appears to be suffering. It often begins with a message, or a phone call late at night, or them appearing somewhere you did not expect them, looking smaller than you have ever seen them look. The aggression is gone. The calculation is gone, or at least it appears to be. What is in front of you now seems like the raw, undefended version of a human being who has finally run out of armor. They might say they have not been sleeping, that they have not been eating, that everything feels pointless without you. They might, for the first time in the entire relationship, admit to things they spent years denying. I know I hurt you. I know I was not who you needed me to be. I have been looking at myself and I do not like what I see. And something in you responds to this so viscerally that it frightens you, because this is what you always wanted. Not the confession specifically, but what it represents, the possibility that they are capable of seeing themselves honestly, that the person you fell in love with was real and is still in there somewhere, buried under all the damage, finally trying to claw their way out. This is the version of them you have been grieving. This is the potential you have been holding on to through every terrible moment of the relationship. And here it is, standing in front of you, asking you not to give up. The pull is not weakness. The pull is human. It is the entirely natural response of a compassionate person being shown exactly what their compassion is most drawn to. You would have to be made of stone not to feel it. And they know that. They are counting on the fact that you are not made of stone. That is precisely why they are here. But here is what you need to hold on to in that moment. With both hands, like your psychological freedom depends on it, because it does. Genuine transformation does not arrive on cue. Real change, the kind that actually rewires the deep behavioral patterns we are talking about here, is slow, private, painful work that happens in therapy rooms and in solitary reckonings with oneself. It does not happen in the exact moment it becomes strategically necessary. It does not time itself to coincide with your departure. And it does not ask you to witness it, validate it, or stay for it. Real change does not need an audience. It does not come with a request attached. What they are showing you is not transformation. It is the performance of transformation, and it is targeted with surgical precision at the specific hope you have been carrying. The hope that this person, underneath everything, is capable of becoming who you always believed they could be. That hope is not foolish. It is one of the most human things about you. But in this moment, it is also a door they are asking you to open so they can walk back through it. And the moment you do, the moment you say, okay, let us try again, or even just, I forgive you, the tears dry with a speed that should terrify you. The vulnerability folds back up and is put away. The promises about therapy get vague and then forgotten. The behaviors that drove you to this point return, often within days, often worse than before, because now they know something new about you. They know exactly how far they have to push before you will leave. They know the precise threshold of your boundary. And they know that if they perform suffering convincingly enough, that boundary will move. You have not saved them. You have taught them how to keep you. There is a question that comes up in this moment that is worth sitting with honestly. When you imagine staying, when you picture yourself opening that door and letting them back in, who are you staying for? Are you staying for the person standing in front of you right now? Or are you staying for the person you imagined they were in the beginning? Because those are not the same person. The person in the beginning was a reflection of your own hopes and values mirrored back to you through the early performance of the relationship. The person in front of you now is the same person who rewrote your history, who whispered about you to your friends, who looked at you with those calculating eyes when they thought you were not watching. The tears are real in the sense that the desperation behind them is real. The fear of losing their primary source of stability is genuine. But desperation is not the same thing as change. Fear of consequences is not the same thing as remorse. And suffering is not the same thing as growth. Walking away from someone who is crying is one of the hardest things a compassionate person will ever do. It goes against something so deeply wired in you that it can feel like a moral failure, like you are abandoning someone in their darkest moment. But compassion without discernment is not a virtue. It is a vulnerability. And the most important thing you can understand right now is this: you are not responsible for the emotional state of someone who manufactured that emotional state specifically to prevent you from protecting yourself. You are allowed to witness their pain without absorbing it. You are allowed to wish them healing from a distance that keeps you safe. You are allowed to close the door gently but completely without owing anyone an explanation for why you did know. They stay to burn, because what comes next, the moment they realize the tears did not work, is the part that will require every ounce of understanding you have built so far. You held the line. You did not open the door. You stood in the fire of their manufactured vulnerability, and you did not reach out to extinguish it with your own peace. And for a moment, there was silence, the kind that feels like the pause between lightning and thunder, where you know something is coming, you just do not know yet how loud it will be. Then it arrived. Not sadness, not acceptance, not the quiet retreat of someone who finally understands that it is over. What arrived was something else entirely, a calculated, precise, and devastatingly targeted campaign designed to do one specific thing: not to win you back. That goal has been abandoned. The new goal is simpler and far more sinister. If they cannot have you, they will make sure that the version of you that walks away from this relationship is so damaged, so confused, so hollowed out by self-doubt that you cannot trust your own mind for years. This is the dirtiest final move, and it has a name. It is called projective identification. And unlike the manipulation tactics that came before it, the gaslighting, the smear campaign, the false surrender, this one does not just target your emotions. It targets your identity. It attempts, through a series of precise psychological maneuvers, to make you become the thing they are accusing you of being. Not just believe it, become it. Here is how it works in practice. They begin a provocation campaign that is almost impossible to describe to someone who has not experienced it, because from the outside it looks like nothing. It looks like ordinary conflict, but from the inside it feels like being slowly lowered into water that is just slightly too hot. Hot enough to be unbearable, not hot enough to make the danger immediately obvious. A comment delivered with a smile that targets the specific insecurity they know lives deepest in you. A denial of something you both witnessed together 5 minutes ago, delivered with such calm certainty that you start to wonder if your memory is functioning correctly. A boundary you set, violated not with aggression, but with a smirk. Just enough to register, not enough to be called out without you looking oversensitive. Drop by drop, day by day, constructed with the patience of someone who has been studying your nervous system for years. And here is what happens inside your body during this phase, because this is the part that most people never talk about. Before you react outwardly, you start to feel something that does not belong to you. A rage that seems disproportionate to what is visibly happening, a trembling in your hands during a conversation that should be mundane, a tightness in your chest that appears before they have even said anything particularly terrible. Your body is registering something your conscious mind is still trying to rationalize. What you are feeling is their emotion, transferred. This is not mystical. This is documented psychology. Emotional contagion is a real and measurable phenomenon. the unconscious transmission of feeling states between people in close proximity. And the narcissist, whether they understand it intellectually or simply operate it by instinct, has learned to use this process as a weapon. They suppress their own rage with a terrifying preternatural calm. They hold it below the surface while systematically dismantling your capacity for emotional regulation through low-level, relentless provocation. They become the eye of the hurricane, still, composed, apparently reasonable, while engineering the storm around them. And eventually, because you are human, because your nervous system, has limits, because no amount of awareness can indefinitely protect a body from sustained psychological assault. You break, you raise your voice, you say something cutting, you throw something, or cry in a way that looks uncontrolled, or finally say the thing you have been holding back for months in a tone that sounds to anyone watching like instability. In that exact millisecond, they transform. The calm they have been performing becomes genuine, or rather it becomes weaponized calm, the composed, concerned expression of someone who has been enduring irrational behavior and is saddened but unsurprised by this latest outburst. If there are people nearby, they turn to them. If there is no one nearby, they documented it, a phone raised with quiet deliberateness, a screenshot taken, a mental note filed for future use. And the story they have been building about you, the erratic one, the unstable one, the difficult one, receives its evidence. They have transferred their shadow into you. And for a moment, looking at yourself through their eyes and through the eyes of whoever witnessed that scene, you see it too. You feel the shame of it in your body before you have even fully processed what just happened. And the thought arrives, quiet and devastating, maybe I am the problem. Maybe I have been the problem all along. Look at me, look at what I just did. This is the move. This is what all of it was building toward. Not to make you stay, not even to make you suffer, though suffering is a side effect they find satisfying. The real goal is this moment right here, where your own reaction becomes the evidence that imprisons you, where your completely understandable, physiologically inevitable response to sustained psychological torture gets reframed as your character, where the person who engineered your breakdown gets to walk away looking like the only adult in the row. Oh, and here's the most important thing I will say in this entire video. The thing I need you to hold on to. Your reaction was not your character, it was your biology. When the human nervous system is subjected to sustained, inescapable stress. When the threat response is activated repeatedly with no resolution. When the emotional regulation system is deliberately overwhelmed by a calculated external force. It responds the way any system responds to overload. It breaks the circuit. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for measured, rational response, goes offline. The amygdala, the ancient threat detection center, takes over. And what comes out in that moment is not who you are. It is what was done to you. A doctor tapping your knee produces a kick. That kick is not your choice. It is a reflex. What they engineered in you was a reflex, a predictable physiological response to a precise and deliberate stimulus. And then they filmed the kick and called it evidence of your violence. Understanding this does not just explain what happened, it dissolves the shame of it. And dissolving the shame is everything, because the shame is the chain. As long as you are focused on your own reaction, replaying it, analyzing it, mortifying yourself over it, you are not looking at what produced it. You are doing their work for them. You are the prisoner guarding your own cell. The moment you understand that your reaction was a manufactured outcome, not a character revelation, the spell breaks. You stop being the person they need you to be. The guilty one, the unstable one, the one who has to make amends for an outburst that they engineered from start to finish. You become something they have no script for. Someone who understands the mechanism. Someone who can watch them run the play and name every move in real time without being consumed by it. This is what P, ecological immunity, actually looks like. Not coldness, not indifference performed as a strategy, not the gray rock technique deployed through gritted teeth while you fall apart privately. Real immunity, the kind that comes from understanding so deep it changes the way you see them at a fundamental level. You stop seeing a person who chose to hurt you. You start seeing a system running a program designed in childhood, reinforced over decades, executed automatically in the presence of any threat to the false self. There is no malice in a program. There is no cruelty in a reflex. There is just mechanism, and you cannot be destroyed by a mechanism you can see clearly. When you reach this place, and you will reach this place, something remarkable happens. The things they do stop landing. The provocations bounce. The tears do not move you the way they used to. Not because you have become hard, but because you can see the architecture of them. You know what is underneath. You know what need is being served. And you can hold that knowledge with something that is not quite pity and not quite indifference, but somewhere in between. A kind of clear-eyed compassion that has nothing to do with staying and everything to do with understanding. You will see their name on a screen someday and feel quiet. Not the hammering heart of old fear, not the ache of old love, not even the hot flash of anger, just quiet. The way you feel when you look at an old photograph of a version of yourself you no longer are. Recognition without ownership. History without grip. That is the destination. That is what this entire painful, disorienting, identity-shaking experience has been moving you toward, not despite the difficulty of it, but through it. The person you are becoming on the other side of this is not the person you were before it started. You are sharper now, more boundaried, more honest about what you will and will not accept, more capable of recognizing within the first few conversations the patterns that used to take you years to name. You did not just survive something, you were educated by something, and that education belongs to you permanently, in a way that nothing they do from this point forward can touch. The dirtiest final move failed, not because you became someone harder, but because you became someone who could finally see it clearly, and that changes everything.